I'm Evan Amato, and in this series, we're exploring how Dostoevsky's work and wisdom guides us towards a deeper understanding of ourselves, our society, and our search for meaning. Now, this is actually part 2 of an earlier video where we're talking about Dostoevsky and the Pantheon of great thinkers. And particularly, we're starting with the dichotomy faith versus reason. We didn't really get to it in the last video, hence part 2. So let's go ahead and tackle that particular dichotomy in the context of Dostoevsky and the Pantheon of great thinkers.
Sure. So, part of what made Dostoevsky so unique as an artist was his polymathic range. Right? Dostoevsky.
Let's talk about real fast what's a polymath.
So, a polymath is someone who has a deep understanding across a variety of subjects, and there's often a reference to something called the T-shape knowledge base.
Okay.
And what it means is that they have broad understanding. They also have one area of specific skill, and they can connect that broad understanding to that area of specific skill. So Dostoevsky's art, his craft, his skill, was the construction of these philosophical novels. But he was able to weave an understanding of human psychology into that. He was also able to weave in an understanding of Russian Orthodox Christian theology into that, and an understanding of philosophical history into that. So these weren't simply crime novels. They were crime novels that were woven from a tapestry of deep understanding across a very wide range. Dostoevsky even wrote an essay on Darwin's Origin of the Species and the dangers of social Darwinism, how social Darwinism could actually lead to prejudice and racism. And we see this idea of the disastrous effects of the philosophy of social Darwinism evidently in Raskolnikov's reaction to a woman who has been taken advantage of. After he gives the initial sum of money to the Marmeladovs and leaves, he encounters a woman on the street who has been drugged and who's being followed by this lecherous old man. And Raskolnikov immediately wants to help this woman. And we see that he's empathetic, he's compassionate. This woman had clearly passed so many other people who hadn't responded, yet Raskolnikov did. This is the same Raskolnikov who goes on to commit 2 bloody murders. So there we go back to this incredible nuance of the soul that Dostoevsky was able to depict. Well, we see that after Raskolnikov makes steps to help the woman by alerting the police and sending the police in the woman's direction, he then immediately changes to a perspective of complete nihilism that's rooted in this philosophy of social Darwinism, thinking everyone, like a percentage, he says 1% is going to be used up, and that refreshes everyone else. And it's a truly awful way of perceiving the world.
Okay, I'd like to elaborate just real fast on that. So that instance, to kind of summarize it, what we have is this woman who has been drugged to some degree, kind of walking aimlessly through the street. This man looking to take advantage of her. Raskolnikov's first reaction is to be compassionate, to defend her, and he calls a police officer. Police officer comes, even gives him money to say, go buy her a carriage ride home, make sure she gets home safely. And then as the policeman and the girl are heading off, he says, well, what did I do that for? And he said, why should I even care? Let me just, to hell with her. Basically, why did I get involved in that? Why did I waste my money? And that moment struck me as a good part of Raskolnikov is the schism in the sense that he reacted on his gut intuition, I think. That's how I read that. His gut instinct was to have compassion, to do something about the situation. But then he almost let an ideology take over and say, oh, well, why did I worry about that? And so it was really the philosophy that overrided his internal compass, if you will. And to the modern reader, we say, well, that wasn't for the better, but it's a good depiction of how that can happen, how an ideology can subvert gut instincts.
And that brings us to this dichotomy of faith and reason. We can use the powers of our intellect to develop systems for life that we think are the most efficient, that we think will create the greatest joy for the greatest number, the least amount of suffering, right? We can arrive at a philosophy of utilitarianism through the intellect, right? And it makes sense on an intellectual level, on a sort of mathematical level, right? But with Raskolnikov, that idea of utilitarianism is actually directly at odds with the compassion that it's rooted in.
The compassion that it's supposed to engender in the world.
Exactly. So he clearly thought that in terms of thought as his reasoning, he clearly thought that this woman being taken advantage of in some sick, twisted way was going to just be part of the world's march forward. He thought that prostitution was necessary, or was just a result of this social Darwinism, or that these crimes were a result of social Darwinism. But he also felt on a very deep level that those things were wrong, and that compassion, love, and self-sacrifice are the most important of things, and these were grounded in the Judeo-Christian ethic that he had been raised to believe in. And so the two were at odds, faith and reason. And what Dostoevsky is able to show us in the end is that actually faith and reason aren't at odds, but faith and reason are only at odds if we take a narrow perspective to what reason encompasses.
Okay.
If we expand what reason means, if we think of reason as using all of our capacities of not simply rational intellect, but also our intuition and our moral sense, then it becomes reasonable to live a life of faith, because a life devoted to something outside of ourselves seems to be the only way that we can truly achieve fulfillment, and the only way that we can be led to act, to ease other people's suffering at every single moment. And that can't be rooted in utilitarianism. Raskolnikov's murder of the old woman, although it was rooted in at first he claimed that it was rooted in a desire to help society as a whole, that he had an altruistic motive for it. The two are internal contradictions. You can't bloodily murder an old woman and also want to be a benefactor for humanity. The human mind isn't designed for that.